Hello and welcome to ATARC's 2021 Multi-Cloud Modernization Virtual Summit. For those who do not know me, my name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. Thank you to our partners over at Rackspace Technology, AWS, VMware, and Carahsoft for helping create today's summit. Additionally, I would like to thank you all at home for joining us today. Today will be an informative event focused on the evolving world of multi-cloud modernization within the federal cloud space. We hope you enjoy this informative session, and we would also like to remind you that after each panel, there will be time for Q&A, so please place all of your questions in the Q&A box on your screen during the panels. And finally, I would like to remind you to answer the poll questions throughout today's panels to ensure that you receive your CPE credits. Up first, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, Chief Information Officer, Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology within the Office of the Inspector General over at the Department of Health and Human Services, Jerry Karen. Jerry, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Kirsten. Good to be here. Good to see you, everyone attending today. So I was asked to give the keynote, thought a lot about it. And of course, one of the things, if anybody doesn't know me, I have been working with ATARC. I've chaired this TIC 3.0 working group, which ended about last December. And I am currently the chair on the Zero Trust working group through ATARC as well, which is going very well and has a lot of participation. So one of the things is we're still working towards cloud modernization, and we know that the EO has come out and it talks about cloud. It doesn't talk about cloud first or cloud smart. It says, what are your plans for moving to the cloud that the agencies are supposed to provide within 60 days. So with that also is heavily within the executive order is a lot on zero trust as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cloud security. Of course, I know from my former agency and the agency that I am with now, you have multiple clouds. So you're basically setting up this what I would refer to as a cloud ecosystem. You have certain clouds for certain things, and deciding on some of those is very important. But also, as you move to the cloud, you know, it's not a lift and shift. You're taking advantage to modernize and do the things that cloud is actually allows you to do that you couldn't do with on-prem because you were so restrictive, or the cost of it was a little too much. But I'm going to talk a little bit about probably heavily about the security aspects of cloud today, just because I think it's important to keep things in mind. We always want to balance, you know, what the mission needs are as well as the security. So definitely some things going forward is, you know, our evolution of data storage has moved from all of this on-prem to now going to a lot of different clouds. And I'm not, you know, you see names of clouds here. I'm not advocating for either one, just using these as examples. So the perimeter is definitely changing. Now, you know, these clouds are accessible. The same O365, for instance, or many of these clouds that I have a personal account on, it's the same front door for the cloud that you use for your government account. So what are bad guys doing now? They're, you know, that portal and where you put in your credentials is internet accessible. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to brute force. So definitely your perimeter has changed. It's no longer this castle and moat where you have the hard outer shell around your on-premises environment. You're now moving your data out here to the cloud. So definitely a change. And some of that data is being accessed, especially during the pandemic when we went to a mass telework, is being accessed through laptops and VPNs, where you may go to your on-premise and boomerang back out, or in some instances directly connected to the cloud. So we know with mobile cloud, insider threat, we're doing a lot of mobile. You know, there's mobile device security, there's hacktivism that we have to deal with, organized crime, unpatched software, targeted malware, social networking, insider threats. Insider threats can be malicious or non-malicious just because somebody's trying to get a mission done, so they try to get do what they can to do that. Lack of cybersecurity professionals, the right training. There's a lot of discussion about that. Inadequate security policies, being compliant versus effective. I talk a lot about that, and a lot of things I talk about. Whereas, I can be compliant by having username and password because I'm providing authentication, but we all know that that isn't effective due to some of the breaches that we've experienced. So threats come from all directions, and it's very hard to keep up on top of all this. And our threats keep changing. Bad admin hygiene, as we can know from some of the past breaches, leads to some of the breaches that we've had with bad passwords, bad admin hygiene. The 50 most common passwords, still people are using simple passwords because they need to remember them. Using single factor authentication, not using multi-factor authentication. Using the same email address when creating online accounts, use the same password on multiple accounts. It's just bad admin hygiene. And then we have legacy authentication versus modern authentication. Some tools still do use some legacy authentication, and they need to be modernized to use more modern authentication methods. And anyone, it doesn't take a lot for a hacker, to be a hacker. On your identity is on the dark web, it costs $1 for a social security number. Credit card, $5, $15, $30. And they don't need much. They just need a laptop, network connectivity, and off to the races they go. So the cost of entry is low for attackers. But we know when we're dealing with nowadays, we're dealing with nation state attacks. We're not dealing with just, hackers sitting in a garage. We're dealing with nation state attacks that are well funded, well organized, and have a mission. I talked about bad passwords. Their complexity. We set complexity, but however, I can have one uppercase letter, lowercase letters, numbers, and a special character. So I could have password 123 exclamation point. I met the complexity standards, but we know that that is not a very good password. Can be easily brute force attacked. So threats with cloud password attack can happen anywhere. I talked about, when you go to something like O365 where it asks for your credentials, it's the same place you go for your personal account. It doesn't know until you provide credentials of where to go to actually authenticate you. So, the bad guys are hitting right directly on that portal. So definitely they have other places to attack, which goes into why our perimeter has moved. There is a panacea there that, all right, my cloud's FedRAMP, I'm good to go. No, it's not. You got to realize what you're still responsible for. So on-prem, you were responsible for managing absolutely everything, configuring everything, patching everything, updating everything. With infrastructure as a service, you still manage applications, data, runtime, middleware, OS, where the vendor manages virtualization, server storage, and networking. That's what they get FedRAMP. Platform as a service, you're responsible for a little less because now the vendor is taking on a lot of the infrastructure aspects, whereas you're just doing application data. And with software as a service, yes, they manage the majority. However, you still have responsibilities for doing the monitoring and doing the actual security settings. Things like conditional access policies is very important that you configure those. It's very important that you know how to monitor your environment, because why? It's your data, you're responsible, and you want to make sure that your data is not compromised. So we definitely have a challenge as a chief information officer. Of course, my challenge is to balance modernization and security. I need to meet the mission, but I also need to be secure. And if we make security too complicated for users, what do? They have a mission to do that they're going to try to get their mission done any way possible. So they will inadvertently try to circumvent security. And we know we have shiny object syndrome, always a challenge. Hey, that's really pretty. I want that. But, every time we're trying to chase that shiny object, we never finish. Because why? Because now vendors are pushing newer capabilities in record time. New updates are coming out for clouds all the time. I know there's been a couple updates that have come out recently where it's changed things for our users, or something didn't work, or a user expected to do something the way they've been doing it and it's no longer there. It's just hard to keep up. And if we keep chasing the new feature all the time, again, we don't finish. And we keep chasing. So it kind of becomes like this. The little puppy chasing his tail, never catches it, but always tries and tries and tries and tries. So ethical hacker, if you know Kevin Mitnick, really smart. Expect there's some things definitely to read. Very, very good information. But he says a company can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and encryption and other security technologies. But if an attacker can call one trusted person within the company and that person complies, and if the attacker gets in, then all that money spent on technology is essentially wasted. So it's not just technology, but it's also good practice. Because it can be easy for hackers. That's all they do is need to make a phone call. So then we talk about zero trust. Zero trust is very important. How it works, we know where our data is, we know where our data resides, we know how our data is accessed. That is what we are trying to protect at the end of the day. So we want to put the protections closest as possible to our data. Principles of zero trust, if you're familiar with Forrester, these are their principles. All resources are accessed in a secure manner regardless of location. Access control is on a need-to-know basis and is strictly enforced. Verify and never trust. Inspect and log all traffic. The network is designed from the inside out. A lot of people come from the outside in, where they start with the identity, but at the end of the day, it's right data to the right people at the right time. So it still becomes about the data. Frederick the Great, and I think this is the way we kind of do security in the past, and we're kind of changing that culture, but he defends everything, defends nothing. Great IT person, Frederick the Great. But we kind of do that, what I call that peanut butter spread approach, and everything doesn't have the same value. So the crown jewels, which is your highest classification of data, is different than your lowest classification, which is your bologna sandwich. I can lose my bologna sandwich. I'll make another one. There's plenty of bologna and bread in the world, but if my crown jewels get lost, I'm in big trouble. So if my bologna sandwich does get compromised, I still want to be able to answer the question, are my crown jewels protected? So definitely there's a culture change that is happening. And I think the EO is, the executive order is helping with that culture change. Whereas we definitely, the technology is there. It's the same, when we talk about zero trust, it's the same tried and true principles, but we're bringing it together as an architecture. But usually the hardest part is the governance, the people and the process. That is just as important as doing the technical. So you have to give just as much time as to change that culture and have that governance in place. There is no silver bullet for zero trust. There's a lot of tools out there. It is an integration effort. Definitely don't think that there is one tool. There will be companies that say, I do zero trust. Well, yeah, you do, but you don't do it all. There's no one company or one tool that I've seen do it all. So definitely, as you go forward with security and your ecosystems, there's a lot of things that you're going to hear about today. I think there's always ATARC always has a good lineup of speakers and panels. So I'm really interested in hearing what some of those thoughts are. But as President Kennedy said, there are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long range risk of comfortable inaction. So definitely when it comes to security, definitely pay attention to how you do your security and what you are responsible for in your security. I like I said, I know that you're going to have a lot of great speakers today. They're going to have a lot of great information, a lot of detailed information on how they go about modernizing their cloud ecosystem. But a lot might be focused on actually that modernization aspect, but please make sure that the security aspect is included. It's got to be a good, well-maintained balance. Anyone interested in getting hold of me, this is how I can be reached. Happy to be here and look forward to the rest of the session today. And thank you for having me. Kirsten, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you as always. We love hearing from you and really appreciate you being here to share that with us. Up next, we have our first panel of the day. If our panelists could please turn their cameras on, and I would like each panelist to introduce themselves, state your name, your agency, your role, and anything you would like to share with our audience up top. Now would be the time to do so. First up, let's hear from Bobby, please.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Looking forward and welcome panel. Bobby Duffy, Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board. I've been on board since last July.
Awesome, thank you. Mike?
All right, I lost my mouse there. Good morning, I'm Michael McVicker. I'm with the United States Tax Court, the Chief Information Officer, and I've been with the tax court right before the pandemic kicked off. So it's been a journey and a half.
Awesome, thank you. And we had a last minute panelist switcheroo, but we're lucky to have Jerry Wheeler here. Jerry, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Jerry Wheeler. Preetha sends her regrets, but I am her chief architect kind of person for the CIO U.S. Postal Service.
Thanks, Jerry. Lorenzo?
Lorenzo Winfrey, Right Space Technology. I'm the Senior Product Manager for our Global Government Solutions Organization. And prior to this, I spent over a decade in the DoD and intelligence community where, among other things, I was responsible for our cloud broker team who was tasked with modernizing our environment, getting us to the cloud.
Thank you so much. And then Bill.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Rowan. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Alliances at VMware. I work in our government, education, healthcare organization, and my primary responsibility is working with the various hyperscalers to our client base in the federal and state and local and healthcare markets.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. So let's start this conversation off. I want to hear a bit about how your agencies have embarked upon your cloud journey. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry first, actually. Tell me a little bit about your cloud journey. At what point did you decide to choose from multiple cloud vendors? And if so, why?
So early on, we realized while everyone else was talking about cloud first, lift and shift, get everything out there, it's like, especially for the Postal Service, who are so large and have such an investment already, we have a very strong on-premise practice to the tune of 20,000 different servers we run. But we call it cloud right. You know, it's another set of tools in our toolkit. And as we do modernization for applications, we go through this assessment process to figure out, you know, where we're at, what are the pain points, what do we want to fix, and then figure out, okay, does this fit well in a cloud or not? If so, which cloud? There's a lot of trade-offs. One of the things we noted real early is the trade-off between WAN bandwidth to and from the cloud versus the cloud services versus on-premise. So we sort of weigh all those costs into this process to get to a reasoned best value placement choice. So yeah, we started that like 2017. We led a contract. And we base it in the contract itself. It included, we had 3 primary offerers that we were chasing. We actually couldn't get the lawyers to get to agreement for one of them. So effectively today we're running in 2 different clouds. But those decisions were made fairly early in our process.
Yeah. And Mike, I understand, coming from a smaller agency, what was your journey with that looking like? Was it different based off the, size? His is really big, yours is much smaller.
Quick background, I came from defense right before heading over, and I think a lot of people work in defense prior. So recovering. But yeah, we're, on a good day, the tax court's 180, 200 people, give or take, and so much smaller problem space. Things we've been trying to work on in defense, closing data centers, moving. I really like Jerry's cloud right. That was the ideal. But I think it's a never-ending journey. I mean, we're always trying to modernize and find new technologies, and the cloud just gives us, as Jerry said, one more tool in the toolbox to be able to evaluate if it really makes sense to do. But what I was trying to get accomplished with in defense, we were able to accomplish within 12 months of the tax court, 12 to 18 months, to move towards zero trust, close most of our data center on-prem with some things staying on-prem, like the, things that make sense, like the video, anything related to security, physical security especially, But when I joined, we had all Windows 7 machines, a legacy system, and I'll tell you, I stood on some shoulders. Before I joined, I'm the first CIO of the tax court. Before I joined, there were a couple, the clerk of the court and a couple others were really advocating, and they had used 18F for consulting, if you were at that GSA agency, to really kind of inform and educate the judges who run the court and the IT and really are the decision makers, that there's a value in kind of not trying to run everything, especially when you don't have a lot of FTEs to commit to cybersecurity and routine patching and all the other things that go with it. So it's been interesting to see on the defense side the larger dream, right? Especially I could imagine larger agencies, and then be able to actually see that dream coming to fruition. But again, a never-ending journey. I think we'll still be on this path for a while.
Mm-hmm. So Bobby, for you over at MSPB, how did you reimagine what you were going to accomplish in a multi-cloud environment when you guys?
Yes, Kristen, it's a multi-year journey. I love Jerry's cloud right, cloud first strategy, cloud aggressive. We took the most complex, we're the federal employee appeal agencies. We do a lot of adjudication, legal processing. Take those applications, design in a newer cloud platform. That would take some time. From there, we could kind of learn from that and start looking how we aggressively move from on-prem. So we looked at secure file shares. We look at our survey platforms, move those mission, right? That mission support out to the cloud. That was able to get us go there much more quickly. Then as what we learn at pandemics is re-examine the collaboration, your voice, your video, your web content. What does that look like? And that's kind of where we're at right now in transitioning everything off of prem into those environments. But what we did learn, and we liked it, and some people brought it up, is re-examine the network. We looked at ways for secure communications to these multi-cloud providers. We're able to contain some costs by doing so, and revisit internet access too, since we're doing more remote work, especially in that new hybrid model. That helped us put that landscape together to secure new investments, reskilling some of it to the workforce, right? Et cetera. So we look at it certainly multi-year, never ending, but that's our path to the cloud.
Great, thank you. So Lorenzo, from the industry perspective, what would you say is a key benefit to multi-cloud environments?
Well, I definitely think a top benefit is kind of the versatility, right? All the hyperscalers have kind of their pros and cons, the things that they do better than others, and multi-cloud gives you the opportunity to put the workload in the appropriate place to maximize performance, cost, scalability, et cetera, and that's something that traditionally you haven't been able to do without significant time and cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, also from the industry side, what's the biggest thing that you're working on accomplishing as it relates to multi-cloud environments?
I think, comments the other panelists have made, we saw a bunch of agencies early on start with a cloud provider. And then as things have continued to progress, more and more agencies, in fact, the vast majority of agencies have not got just two, but when you start to look at SaaS solutions, they may have 3, 4, 5 other providers that are in there. And so the next big question becomes, how do you really take advantage? Because each cloud provider, in a lot of cases, will have a variety of tools that you might want to use for one application or another. And things obviously continue to evolve. So the vast majority of our customers are asking us, how do we move easily from one provider to another provider? In the beginning, we may have done lift and shift. How do we become more agile and be able to take advantage of these sort of activities as they come about? And as to actually our keynote speaker early on, when he was talking about zero trust and he's talking about the process pieces, that's also a key aspect that comes into play here. The technology will continue to evolve, but making sure that we've put in place processes, not just from a security perspective, but also so that customers are getting the most out of these tools and the most out of these services that they're paying for. And that's really where we're seeing the vast majority of the conversations going today.
Great. So since Bill mentioned SaaS, I was actually going to ask Jerry a question. What has your experience with SaaS been for multi-cloud? And for those who do not know, can you explain what SaaS is?
So SaaS is software as a service. We actually have several different SaaS systems we use, primarily for non-differentiating functions. So purchasing things, some of the HR functions, some of the stuff that's not, geared towards our primary mission of, moving mail, right? But it's been factored out across industry. So yeah, we've got the Salesforce, we've got ServiceNow, we've got several of these SaaS things. Trying to connect with them in a secure way with tick mandate sometimes gets tricky, but bottom line is once you get them connected for their given purpose, they work well. Early on we had people take ServiceNow and decide that would be our cloud provider and tried to use it for infrastructure as a service and other stuff, and I would not recommend that. But clearly we have a body of work that is all SaaS based. If it's something like e-discovery or other tools where it's out there, it's an industry, we favor that. But for all of our custom kinds of applications we build and manage, the differentiating applications, that's all primarily, prefer PaaS, some IaaS, but so platform as a service is our first go-to when possible. Again, we currently are spinning up 2 clouds. Interesting story. We have this thing people can sign up for called informed delivery, where people can get emails with the images of their mail for the day. What that amounts to is we've got actually we're up to 40 million subscribers. So we have millions of emails that have to go out in this about 7-hour window. So it is actually a classic cloud case where I spin up 800 cores of stuff to generate all the emails and then tear it down every day. But we early on did this proof of concept where we assumed that we didn't know everything. And we went into the 2 clouds and we actually built it 3 different ways in each cloud. We used containerization, we used basic IaaS and functions, serverless. And in order to get to learn about how does each cloud work, and we found significant differences in the networking and security space. But we also found how they charge for it is significantly different. How they perform is significantly different. We found, our fastest throughput came with serverless, but it was very erratic. And we never could explain why that was. So depending upon your use case, you very well might want to run a POC with a couple different architectures in order to figure out the best platform, because each cloud's got multiple types of services you could use to implement with. So I don't know if that helps or not. But
well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. So on that note, you mentioned containerization. We have a poll question that has to do with containerization. Might be a good time to pop that one up there. So the poll is asking, what is the adoption of containers in your agency? And your options to answer this are none, you are just getting started with containers, some adoption, significant adoption, mostly all applications are using containers, or you are unsure. So if you're at home, and our panelists as well, feel free to answer this. And we will pop up the results in just a moment. And then we can talk about what we see. Alyssa, if you could please put the results when they're ready up on the screen. Okay, so I guess mostly significant adoption of containers, but it looks like there's some people who said, I do not know. And I don't know if that means they don't even know what containers are. Lorenzo, do you want to kind of explain what that is and how it applies to multi-cloud environments for those at home?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think, the whole container movement is kind of a really significant development in the space in terms of how do you design and execute kind of high level architectures. And effectively, you instead of needing the entire kind of OS to actually go out and build this thing, right, you're only kind of running the portions of of the operating system that you need for the capability to actually go execute. So it gets to be a lot more efficient. You get to reduce the attack surface, right? So instead of having to maintain kind of across this larger platform, I'm only having to control my container ecosystem and then the binaries and code associated with the things that I'm containerizing, which makes it a lot simpler there. But of course, getting a plan in place of how to effectively implement it, right? How to effectively evaluate its value, and then most importantly, how to build great capabilities based on that approach is definitely something that takes a lot of commitment and a lot of kind of working through what success looks like. But it is, I think, a game changer for the organizations that manage to effectively adopt it.
Thank you. Thank you for clarification on that. So, Bobby, you mentioned before in a previous answer that you were re-architecting your network, and I was wondering if you could expand upon that a bit. How is multi-cloud enabling you to do so?
Eliminating the choke points, revisit access, revisit non-privileged users. We deal a lot with the public, uploading artifacts and legal documentation. That gave us, to Lorenzo's point, what's the flexibility, versatility, what cloud gives us today, right? How can we control the pace of that change? But I think that helped us there with some of just the cloud maturity and just having multiple clouds, multiple work streams, and mission support attached to this. I think it gave people more awareness, more confidence too on resiliency and not just a flat network anymore. And revisit that, securing the enterprise security was a big part of that discussion. Just helped us move forward. So now we not only adopt it, it's much easier to embrace. And that conversation's already had at the executive level. So it just makes it easier to, for business agility, for change, what have you.
Excellent, thank you. And on that same note of re-architecture, Mike, I'm wondering what were the rewards and benefits that came out of your own re-architecture and transition?
I think the biggest one was just be able to respond to the pandemic. We were set up where our data center ran the main case management system, and like I said, everybody had Windows 7 desktops accessing inside the building, and within 24 hours, they're like, "Hey, we're closing the building." So how do we respond to that? And there's policy and other things, but how do we get people working at home? Being in court, there's a lot of paper, so scanners and printers are a big thing. I didn't know how many we had. I still seems like more than we need, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, I mean, it was able to employ cloud services. Kind of what Bobby's saying is really kind of redesign the way people are getting access to the different services and the different network, trying to move workloads, as Lorenzo said, off-prem to give more access and more ready access than the small pipe we had coming into the building. And then really kind of re-architecting some of the things rapidly, moving off the Windows 7 desktops to Win 10 laptops and getting those employed, again, employing cloud services to manage those, and we'll configure and manage them, ship them to people's homes instead of my guys at the court just building them from scratch. I do want to say one thing on SaaS, though, and just a perspective. We use SaaS, and Jerry mentioned a few like Salesforce, where it's someone's providing you a software, right? You get access through that GUI. But we use, other federal agencies, and I kind of perceive those as SaaS as well when they provide the HR or the procurement. So I don't know if, just a matter of perspective, I don't know if SaaS necessarily means a commercial vendor. I think if we have services that we can adopt from each other and provide those services, especially for the back office stuff where we can consolidate, that's kind of like SaaS to me. I treat it like that because I still have to get people access to it.
Yeah, definitely. So, Bill, when it comes to the pandemic and multi-cloud environments, what has the pandemic proven to you at your agency or organization, as well as what you've seen happen for your customers at other agencies?
Well, it's really been an interesting combination of the several of the discussions here. And so I'll kind of walk through it. Jerry talked early on about, that certain applications and the way they ran the particular use case, and one may not run as efficient. This application didn't run as efficient in this particular cloud provider as it did over in this cloud provider, or the way maybe it was architected. He mentioned serverless and or the amount of cores that were spinning up. The same sort of situation that Bobby talked about in terms of an ability to re-architect that network. You know, most of all these networks were designed and crafted when people were in a particular facility or series of facilities. It was very hierarchical. And guess what? The people weren't in those buildings anymore. They were spread out throughout maybe a metropolitan area or maybe across the country. And now, so we were accessing the information differently. We were communicating in a much more of a flat environment. And Lorenzo, in his commentary about the containers, now I've always kind of looked at containers kind of under the concept of Legos, and each individual Lego block gave me the ability to put them together and create something. But I could also repurpose specific containers so that now all of a sudden I can build my applications so that they all follow a similar startup, or maybe I build in some aspect of security to the container. And so now every single container or every single app has a security component built into it from the ground up. And I think one of the things that's come about of the pandemic is I have no doubt we would have pushed forth with a lot of these ideas over a period of time. But the reality was that we were forced to adopt, to try things that we might not have otherwise would have pushed the envelope. And we did it a lot faster. And guess what? Nothing fell apart in the middle of the night. Sure, there were bumps along the way, but I think it showed the perseverance and actually the creativity of a lot of the agency's IT folks in being able to adapt to this new normal in what most people would consider record time. I don't care if you're in government or you're a commercial enterprise. We proved that within this community, without a doubt, the most geographically dispersed workforce in the world, that they were able to do things that I think most people would have said, this is going to really be a challenge. And so now the question becomes, as we kind of move maybe back into more of a hybrid workforce, what's next? What can we continue to evolve? Where can we continue to find efficiencies? Where can we be able to reinvest those dollars that we save to become even more efficient and provide back to our agencies or to the constituents a much more robust environment, one that they may not have even perceived possible. But I think this is what's going to help make this particular community an interesting workforce to want to come into, because they realize agencies will be able to continue to evolve. They'll continue to get to use new skills that they may not be able to gain in the private sector. I think that's going to be one of the really interesting things that plays out about this.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing that. So let us answer some audience questions before we pop up our next poll question. Is anyone familiar with the app WriteFacts? I've never heard of it before. Anyways, someone said it's been a lifesaver with telework. So there's that. Mike, you mentioned SaaS in your multi-cloud environment, wondering if your SaaS had met FSMA or FedRAMP requirements.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And being from defense, you know, that was always the pain of you could build an app in a month, but you couldn't get it ATO'd for 2 years. But the being at the court, and it's been I'll go a little off topic. When I got here, I was looking for services to kind of move things outside, right? We don't have the manpower and skills to run some of the stuff we do, but especially in cybersecurity. But we went to agencies like CISA, and they say, "Oh, yeah, we can help you out." And then they say, "Oh, wait, you're a court? Oh, we can't help you out with everything you want, only some things." And being in the judicial branch, separate from the executive branch, has been an eye-opening in of itself. But that said, we don't have the requirement to follow those. But what we've done is basically try to use FSMA, FedRAMP approved products first, and until we can find that there's some way that cost benefit analysis. And it doesn't mean it's fly by night, Wild Wild West. It's do you have a industry equivalent type of proof, right, that you're doing things secure? And I think that's for us, that's been the most important. And as you're saying, Bill, we do things that got us through the pandemic, right? So, and there's that weighing of risk as well. Is this really like the right facts? I don't know what that is, but we had to find a fax product to use for paper, and it may not be FedRAMP approved, but it's gotten us this far, and we'll move out from there when that next time comes around to do a procurement and see if there's another product out there.
Thank you. So we popped up the poll while Mike was sharing his answer on SAS with us, but the poll asks, what has your agency's biggest challenge when adopting multi-cloud been? And it looks like most people said security. No one answered managing cloud spent. There was also the option of lack of resources, governance, control, compliance, managing multiple clouds, performance, and no one said building a private cloud or other. So just real quickly, I know there's probably multiple, challenges, but what would our panelists have chosen if you answered it or did not answer it? What would you have said? Jerry, what would you have picked?
Managing multiple clouds, you need different. They're all slightly different security, policies, different firewall policies, different expertise. So we have a pretty strong effort to get people trained, and basically for architecture, at least, I've split it into different groups. So we have people spinning up in the different clouds to get the depth we need to be able to support the multi-cloud.
Would any of our panelists chosen something different?
I would say security, and not security for security's sake, but just the getting the government folks up to speed on the changes that come with adopting different clouds. Like Jerry said, having those multiple clouds also brings, and the differences between them also brings security challenges with different standards and such.
Yeah, I echo what Mike says. Absolutely, security.
Security. Anyone else?
I think I would have probably gone with expertise. I know during my time in government, building teams and trying to migrate over 200 applications to the cloud, do we have the right talent? Do we have the folks with the expertise necessary to effectively and rapidly implement these things? And once you start talking about moving beyond lift and shift, right? When we're talking about refactoring and replatforming, you need a certain level of skill set and a certain type of skill set to make sure that we're architecting these applications in a way that are going to be cloud native and they're going to be fit for mission. And that was tough for us. We kind of got lucky. We got a couple of good contracts in place. We were able to kind of accelerate what we were doing, but the process of upskilling our workforce at the time was major. And I think that's something as I look across government, I'm still seeing is how do we get more folks with the right set of skills into the right places to, drive the mission forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's one other interesting benefit that comes about of this, and Mike alluded to it in his example, one of his examples of an application they needed to use. As the workforce and organizations become have a much depth, better understanding of the security models, et cetera, agencies will be able to look at something new that may come from the provider and say, there's a chance that this could really help us be more agile, save money, whatever the mission requirement piece is. But maybe that particular application or that particular tool set is not yet FedRAMP accredited. As organizations better understand how the environment is structured, they'll be able to say, it's not, but the risk we're taking is minimal. We'll go ahead and do an agency ATO for this particular piece. We saw that happen during the pandemic where a variety of services, let's face it, everything couldn't get FedRAMP fast enough. But organizations looked and said, 90% of this is, the 10% I'm willing to take the risk because it really isn't much risk to our organization and the benefit is so great. So I think that's another downstream effect that happens from part of this conversation we're having now.
Yeah, definitely. All right, another audience question came through. Any of our panelists, please feel free to jump in and answer it. How are agencies sharing with each other the lessons learned for cloud adoption, and is it available to the public? So perhaps there's a specific guidance that maybe you guys could refer to? Or forums like ATARC.
Go with the forum.
All right, right, I answered that one.
But I would say the industry partners, they tend to share stories. Obviously, they want to get a contract and build a partnership if they're outside your wire. But I think they bring value in bringing those stories, and oftentimes I'll ask, hey, who's your point of contact over it? Pick the agency, and they'll get us in touch so we can swap those stories out.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, from a vendor perspective, our clients are our best advocates. And to Mike's point, when we go to meet with a customer and they're discussing a particular business or a mission requirement, we're going to align that to something somebody else has already done. At this stage of the ball game, there are still some firsts, but many customers are at the same spot trying to do this in the same sort of things. So as much as we can cross-reference for clients, and they may not be necessarily formal references, but the community that's represented by our panel here, it's a pretty small community. Everybody knows each other. It's pretty simple to pick up the phone at any one agency, or for that matter, a partner working across the spectrum, and say, have you guys had this challenge? What did you do? What technologies are you using? What have been the good? What have been the bad? And I think that's going to continue. We used to have big conferences where we get together and we hear a variety of speakers. While we haven't done that in a while, we certainly have done these type of forums where it gives customers a chance to understand what other agencies are doing, and that will only spur on additional conversations from this.
Yeah, Kristen, if I can add to that, I think a little bit, I think OMB Max, I think I think the small agency CIO and CISO listservs are excellent ways. I agree with everyone. That's a benefit of the pandemic. I know, especially at the small agency micro level, we pick up the phone, talk to each other, sharing documents, creating, like I talk with my legal friends, the small agencies with that's been a great resource too, on just implementation or a new CISO BOD or mandate. How are you addressing this? Are you going to opt in or out? I mean, that's one nice thing about being a small agency. Your willingness to share and get a better outcome and output, I think, is great.
And Bobby, I think you hit the nail on the head with OMB Max, right?
Yeah.
And from a FedRAMP perspective, this is a lot of things I think a lot of government agencies may not even know, but they have access to that platform. So when solutions are getting FedRAMP and they're getting FedRAMP authorized, that body of evidence, all that documentation, how these solutions work, how are we securing the things that we're saying that we're securing? What does the architecture look like? The government can actually request access to that repository and get a look at those things to determine if they're comfortable with the things that we're saying we're doing and how that thing is how it's secured and how it's managed. And I think, in terms of, like you say, having those discussions internally about kind of architecture and the way things are built and designed, and is this thing going to scale and meet our requirements? I think that's a huge kind of tool to have access to be able to go and get access to the detailed documentation about how these solutions are designed to help you determine if it's something that's going to be a fit for you.
Great answers. Thank you, guys. So, Jerry, Preetha mentioned in our prep call, my question would have been, what was your experience with sandboxing? And I would ask if you could please describe what that is to our audience as well, and how it relates to multi-cloud environments.
Sandboxing. All right. So we have a concept. We have 3 or 4 different kinds of sandboxes we'll create. So pretty much in our structure for our cloud accounts, we've created hierarchies with policies and stuff to manage access. And down at the bottom end, at the leaf, is pretty much the environments for dev, sit, cat, prod for an application. So those are all kind of just normal fare. But then there's work where you got people taking classes and they need access to do some of the lab work, or is one kind of sandbox. Or you want to test a new technology, but it's not approved yet, so we don't know how to harden and secure it, but yet we need to get the experience to figure out how to harden and secure it. So, there's another kind of sandbox where I need I need to be able to reach out to the internet and pull in all the open source packages and stuff in order to build out the technology, in order to figure out now what does it work, will it meet our need. So anyway, we have different kinds of sandboxes that are pre-development, if you will, in our experience. So bouncing between the development teams and the security teams has been kind of a challenge, but the bottom line is everyone everywhere I look, people need a place to play, if you will, because we've talked about using different clouds for different technologies like AI, ML, the services they provide, but until you actually take it for a spin around the block, you don't know if it's going to meet the need or not. And so we're using sandboxes that are just basically a lockdown environment for people to go in and do that testing, early testing, before it goes into actual development.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel have experience with sandboxing that they would like to share?
Yeah, I'll add to that and kind of dovetail off what Lorenzo said earlier about containers. So if you go on, if anybody goes on GitHub, looks up the U.S. Tax Court, you'll find our code base for the our case management system, and I'll walk you through how to actually build out and run the case management system using containers on pretty much any machine. But that's really what we do as part of the development process. From developing through testing and such, we use the containers and build out the sandboxes. Spin it up, run it, test something, test the functionality, try to troubleshoot something if there's something wrong. So to what Jerry said, it's really good for any type of dev test type activities.
Awesome, thank you. So Lorenzo, you mentioned before that staffing, building up teams during this time was a challenge. What can you share with our audience about that, how you guys overcame those issues and what those issues really were?
Yeah, definitely. For Rackspace, it was really different because even before the pandemic, we were very kind of distributed, a remote company, working from home. So the transition was probably smoother than most. We were able to kind of rapidly shift over and get to, I want to say like 99% of the workforce was remote pretty quickly after a lot of the kind of stay home things came out. The challenge for us, though, again, still in terms of continuing to do the things that we were doing, continuing to kind of move different initiatives along, it definitely took some, I think, adjustment in terms of kind of shifting gears on that. And I know that was one of the things, as well in terms of, my time in the government, just trying to work through getting that right talent, all the regulation, right, all the different steps. I remember it used to take us an extremely long time to get somebody through the process, and then we get frustrated because by the time we thought we were getting close, the person would drop out of the pool and you kind of have to start the whole thing over again. So it's definitely been a challenge, but I think a point Bill made and several other panels made earlier, if there's one big takeaway, I think, from all of this is we've proven that we can move faster than we ever believed we could move before. And I think that's a genie that's out of the bottle. I don't think you're going to put that cat back in the bag. And I think that's a great thing for both the public and the private sector.
Absolutely. Any other panelists want to weigh in on staffing challenges?
It's hard.
I think
especially hiring the right talent.
Yeah, hiring is still, I foresee it's going to be an issue for quite some time. I think finding the right talent, maybe we can expand our parameters in terms of where people are located, and that'll help a little bit. But the truth of the matter is, I think all of us are competing for basically the same talent pool. And, I think as organizations start to look and say, this is where I want to be in 12, 18 months, and I'm going to try to hire some folks that are going to help us get to that direction. It's a great initiative, and certainly there's a lot of great young talent in the workforce. I think that a lot of what we've been discussing here today are things that people that are in the technology space want to be working on those. I think a lot of them have had the perspective, I don't want to work on legacy systems. I want to work on new and interesting things. There's probably nothing more interesting than helping agencies that are paramount to our country, whether it's moving the mail, whether it's our tax court systems. I mean, we're talking about multi-cloud. We're talking about the building of new applications using containers. We're talking about changing or increasing our security models against the threats. If you're a technologist, this has got to be the most exciting industry to work on with some of the most important customers that are out there. You would think this would be the area that most people would want to gravitate towards to help support their country. So I think it's going to be a tough market for a while, but I think we've got some interesting pieces behind us that is going to attract top talent.
If I can add to that, Bill, I don't know if it's our HR or the USA Jobs, the way that jobs get advertised, but we'll put a job rec out and say, you can live anywhere in the US and all the resumes come from DC. You're like, hey, buddy. But to your point, it's like we have conversations about how to strategy conversations about how to actually put the job recs out there. We get to a point where we want to hire all these people, but we're kind of limited by OPM's pay standards, right? And you're like, okay, well, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics kind of publishes like what those costs should be, but we aren't really using those. We're using this OPM kind of weird scales and then all the history that goes with that. And I'm sure there's workarounds, but we're still working through. But we're always trying to get to like you said, the same pool of people, but especially if you're in the DC area, we're all trying to just one up each other. That's where if there are shared services or our industry partners and bringing them into who can pay the higher wages and can hopefully find the right talent to bring to bear on our problems as we figure out the government side of this whole thing.
So another audience question came in, wondering if our panel could further discuss some of the challenges, benefits around CI/CD application development experiences across their multi-cloud environment. It's a good question. CI/CD application development. Anyone have insights into that? Jerry, you just came off mute. Did you want to add? Or maybe it was Jerry. Go ahead.
I just clicking to look at the so, but yeah, they're again each of the clouds are slightly different. I know for us, we view it as 80-20 in that a lot of our applications are, our legacy applications are all just J2EE Java on top of an Oracle database. So being able to take that 80% and use common services that we talk about cloud agnostic. How do we build it so that I could, in fact, take the container image and move it between clouds? How do I use services that are compatible between each other? Like everyone's got some sort of version of containerization, Kubernetes, and some sort of something that'll integrate with Kafka. But the 20% is where you get into differentiating stuff, where AI ML, that gets special. But our goal is to, as you move to containerization, your CI/CD, we're looking to actually probably use one cloud to do our CI/CD pipelines and actually take the images and move it across the clouds. That's what we're thinking.
Great. Any of our other panelists want to weigh in?
Say for us, our CI/CD pipeline crosses multiple clouds. If you start using SaaS and where our code repo is and where we actually run the source code, if you will. So from one aspect, it's been great, because we can rapidly change out different components of CI/CD moving from one solution to another, both provided by cloud vendors. The other side of that is you've done a lot of source code in Terraform, with the idea that at some point, if we wanted to move from one cloud provider to another and supported by Terraform and those functions supported, and there's that promise has yet to be realized. But I always hope that you're investing in the right thing to have the ability to be more agile and move across different, figure out where the right place to run that workload is.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, as far as benefits, right? There's a whole, major kind of DevSecOps push, across government in particular, but industry as well, right? And the benefits are enormous, right? From a speed perspective, from a consistency perspective, kind of taking more of those manual inputs out of the process, right? Using automated code scanning, using those orchestration engines to get to the point where you can rapidly deploy capabilities in half the time, 1/10 of the time, and I'm very interested to see the progression on that. At a lot of larger government organizations and private organizations as well. I mean, they're doing this thing to huge effect. One of the great examples I like to use is there's a streaming service, and if you open their application, 6 o'clock in the morning, right, and look at it. And then you come home in the afternoon and you open it again, it's technically not the same capability, right? Because they're leveraging, containerization, they're leveraging DevSecOps, they're leveraging kind of CI/CD to make tweaks all the time, right? They're changing fonts, they're slightly changing colors, they're changing, the back end, components here and there. So they're always innovating, they're always iterating. And so I think the benefits are enormous. I think the challenges, of course, are understanding what success looks like, right? What are you really trying to accomplish? I think that you have to have a philosophical mind shift inside of organizations because it is different than the way that it has traditionally been done. And I know that it's not one of those things that's going to change overnight, right? To a lot of folks, you describe it, and I remember, having an executive say, well, that it kind of sounded like magic, right? You mean to tell me that we're going to do this and this and this, and that thing that takes us all this time now, and it's going to have security built in, and it's going to come out on the other side, and it's just going to run? And we're like, yes, right? And so I think you definitely have to have that communication, those discussions internally about what success looks like, how you're going to measure it, how you're going to, have robust governance around it. But if you can get that together, I think there's a tremendous amount of value to be gained from the kind of CI/CD ecosystem.
Fantastic, thank you.
The other interesting piece to this that comes about, and to echo Lorenzo's comments, if you look at some of the work that's been being done in Army Futures Command with their software factory, or Kessel Run has gotten a lot of press up at the Air Force in their software factories. In as much as the code that's being turned out, it's, to Lorenzo's point, the processes they're following, the rapid innovation, deploying the applications, the upgraded applications, and people are getting accustomed to it. I think, I remember when our organization first moved to Office 365, and one day I realized, well, the Outlook icon was a little different. Well, it didn't change that I didn't use the application that day. It's just that continued innovation. And yes, it may look like a little different color, but the reality is there's more innovation that was behind just a color switch. And we become adopting to that a lot quicker now, I think, than we were, say, 4 and 5 years ago. We're not pausing, and that's not to say there's not a lot of work being done behind the scenes to make sure things come off flawlessly. But I think that we've become much more accepting of this type of new normal. And if that continues to accelerate again, I think we're going to continue to see great innovations. The other part too, against all the cloud providers that are out there, all the major names, is they're constantly trying to make the most basic services better, more agile, more cost effective, so that if an agency was using an infrastructure as a service, some compute resources, as they continue to tweak their algorithms or go to new chipsets, they're consistently competing against each other to help drive down the overall cost of the infrastructure itself and add value services on top of that. That's going to be a benefit to all the agencies. That's going to be a benefit to all the enterprise customers that use these same services. So this is really going to help their constant innovation to gather workloads, gather resources from agencies. That innovation is going to continue. And I think that in the long run, we're all going to benefit greatly from it.
Great answers and insights. All right, so let's pop up our third and final poll question. In your opinion, how much of an impact will multi-cloud computing have on the federal cloud space? Your options are great impact, moderate, slight, no impact, or you do not know. So if you're at home, just a reminder, please answer these if you would like to be eligible to receive your CPE credits. And with that, I guess let's talk a little bit about the future of the cloud before our panel comes to a conclusion. Bill, I was actually going to call on you next. Where do you see the future of multi-cloud? Speaking to building upon realizations.
So if I expand, if I look at the multi-cloud definition to not just be infrastructure or PaaS, but also SaaS services that we get, I think we're going to probably move to an environment where in a handful of years, there's going to be 20 to maybe 30, 35% of applications that may still exist in the on-prem environment. We'll go with the 20 to 30%. But the vast majority of the applications that are going to be out there as SaaS services, or customer agencies will host applications. I think Mike mentioned earlier, maybe I'll get a use of an application from another agency that's out there. I think that's really going to be where the future of where this goes. At a place like VMware, when I log into our application portal, I've got a list of about 80 or 90 applications that are all SaaS-based services. You know, whether it's payroll, whether it's HR, whether it's something as simple as opening up a trouble ticket, you know, all those things are not core to what we do as a company. And I suspect most agencies are the same way. What are we doing that's core to our mission? There's some of that we're going to continue to build and we're going to continue to host, but a variety of these pieces that we can now get as a service. First, I can move it off my CapEx line to my OpEx line. That's going to help us from a budget perspective. I can continue to make sure that application is innovative because I've got a variety of customers that are utilizing it. I get those economies of scale. And I think it's going to allow us to focus our IT resources on just what we want. We want to be able to use their mental power to help us make our agencies better, fulfill our mission, versus worrying about the blinking lights on a particular server or a networking device that I'm having difficulty with. We can focus those resources in the right place. I feel pretty confident that's the direction this is going to move.
Great. And Lorenzo, when it comes to relationships with folks in the industry and government, how do you feel like the future of that will play out? Will it become even more imperative, or what are your thoughts around that?
I definitely think so. I think Bill made a great point, right? You got to do more with less. And so leveraging the brain power, the investment of industry is absolutely the way to go. I remember that was a big part of our strategy before, right? You're taking those multiple inputs and it's a thing that we might have done internally ourselves, but there's no way that we'd ever be able to invest to the level, provide the number of inputs as far as features and capabilities and those things that you see in industry and in those kind of SaaS solutions, and the speed at which those things are developed and delivered. You don't have to worry about updating them because those things are kind of locked into kind of just the nature of the way that the services are created. So I think that it's definitely a tremendous benefit, something that agencies definitely need to align around, because to Bill's point, and he said something I say to our customers all the time, as far as rat space and our positioning and delivering solutions, is focus on your core competency, right? And a lot of times, right, the infrastructure components are means to an end. You do them because you have to, right? I'm deploying servers and networks and right, and you're doing it because you have to. But ultimately, your mission is something different. And so why not offload that responsibility, the risk, right? Offload those things to a service provider, and then that frees up your team to make best use of their resources, time, and talent to do the things that are really going to drive your mission forward.
Awesome, thank you. And then I want to turn it over to our government panelists and hear, what are your thoughts around the future and what you could expect to see or what you hope to see, starting with Bobby, please.
I think one of our strategies, we've talked about this, is creating a service-oriented culture. It's a lot of words right there. And I think, Bill, I think Lorenzo, we're all kind of saying that. And that's wearing different hats. And you have to be okay with that. You know, sometimes, certainly so. Project management, certainly a statistician, data analysis, be comfortable writing contract security requirements. Well, it's just it's a different playing field right now. And some of it's reskilling, education, and awareness. But I think you have to sit down with a lot of, those IT specialists and some of our, the traditionalists, right? And it's changing faster than they think. So I think that's real important to create that and have that, I think project managers are more like service delivery managers now, especially on SaaS products, right? What's that governance look like? What's that, governance is a big piece. We didn't talk about the records, the privacy, accessibility. It's all of that too, right? I think that has to be part of the conversation. So it's certainly not an IT control thing anymore. I think there's a level of maturity, but I think just creating that service-oriented culture will help you, right? Create some space to give you the time to get yourself educated, aware, informed. And I think it'll help you with overall, IT delivery. And that's our mission, is delivering, that system or that network, right? And to make it seamless as possible. It's a good time to have that part of your toolkit, right? And others on the team are willing to step up and wear those other hats and roles. Great.
Jerry, over to you. What can we expect the future of USPS look like?
Constantly changing. With one of the things we're working to keep up with, we talk about the clouds being different. It takes different skills, et cetera, but the payoff is going to be, we already see it because of the way our contracts are set up, where feature parity bounces back and forth to where if you're locked into just one cloud, that's all you're ever going to see. And I think by leveraging multiples, you'll see innovation happen at a faster rate, because each of the vendors is trying to get that new shiny thing to get your dollars, right? So there's that. There's mitigation. I mean, there are risks locking into one cloud, as far as price escalation and outage, actually, to where we want it to be a light lift if we ever have to move. We are, how do I put this? We are contracting for some of our IT services at this scale to where once you're locked in, you see your costs escalates more than they should. And so we want to keep that exit strategy available should we need it.
Great. And then Mike, over to you. How much of an impact will multi-cloud computing have on federal cloud space, specifically at U.S. tax court?
Yeah, I think echoing what everybody else said, it's going to be about services, agility to move between services. I think we'll see more and more boutique services for niches, the kind of the microservices where the large scale applications are just kind of going to be few and far and few between, with more services we can just move to for specific functions. But I think our role as the government side becomes, as Bobby said, that service delivery, but really that integration and architecture, really owning the design and understanding how these services come together to meet the mission. Our job is to take the dollars from the taxpayer and add value, right? And if we can do that through services, so we don't have to own those, and understand the architecture, maintain the institutional knowledge of how it comes together to meet the mission. And as the mission changes, as it does from time to time, then realigning is required. And I would say, that there's that question of risk. We said a couple of times. I can't transfer the risk to a vendor, but I can definitely align with them. I like the alignment of my risk with a vendor. If I get hacked at the tax court and I own everything, well, that's my name on the front page. But if the vendor who's providing the service gets hacked, their business could go out of business. And so it's mine and theirs. I'm just one more customer. So I think it helps even from that when we talk about FedRAMP and FISMA. That alignment of risk is really value add, I think.
Great. All right, we're almost out of time, but I want to do a final round, rapid fire. Final thoughts. What do you want to leave the audience with? It can be, a book, a quote, words to live by, whatever you like to say. This is your time to share it. Let's start with Bill, please.
I guess if I was going to leave everyone with a final thought is, I think multi-cloud is obviously here to stay, and it's going to continue to evolve from where it is. It's nothing to be scared of. It may be a little bit more work on the front end, but when you really tap into the art of the possible, you'll understand how just an important step it's going to be in the evolution, not just of the agency and the organization you work for, but developing the skill sets for your career.
Thank you, Bill. Over to you, Lorenzo.
Definitely. So I agree with Bill. Multi-cloud is here to stay. The value is just too great. The flexibility is just too great to do anything different. But when it comes about making that plan of how you're going to leverage multi-cloud, how you're going to incorporate into your environment, just got three kind of things for you, right? Have a plan, stick to the plan, work your plan, develop a common lexicon. We went through this internally where you use the same words and you talk past each other. So have a common lexicon so that when you have conversations, everybody is on the same page. And then finally, communicate across your organization to make sure that everybody is on the same page and stays on the same page.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And over to you, Bobby.
Yeah, I love what everyone's saying. Certainly aim high, be able to conceptualize that desired state, right? That'll set the tone for, for change, right? And that'll set the tone and pathway for some of it's strategic, but that's kind of where you want to be. I think that's very important. And create that service-oriented culture. It's here to stay. It's not going to go anywhere for a while. And I think even more now with these hyper operating models, right? That's going to be a lot more flexibility, right? And we're going to have to revisit, rebaseline, or re-examine how we're doing things today. And I think there's going to be a lot of benefit out of that. So keep aiming high.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobby. And over to you, Jerry.
Know what's under the covers. Some of our experiences have gotten to where when you dig into why you have performance issues or other things, it gets into how the cloud providers have actually constructed the service under the covers. In one of our testing, we were having performance issues and we got told use a different programming language. And in fact, when we did that, we got different performance because of how they took that serverless feature and laid it out based on the language. You actually had different hardware underneath. So I like all the words I've heard, aim high, try stuff. But when you see oddities, dig into it to understand it, because as in my mind, coming through multi-cloud, trying to understand appropriate placement, part of that is understanding what's going to perform the best for you in which cloud and why. So know what's underneath the covers.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. And wrap us up, Mike.
Yeah, echo Jerry a little bit. Trust but verify. The vendors are selling a product. The salesman will tell you it does everything, including making julienne fries. And you get there and, APIs aren't quite what you thought. The security is not exactly what you thought. Functionality for certain things may not be there. It's so trust but verify, and is what I'd leave you with.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And thank you to all of our panelists. That is all the time we have today, but this was such an enlightening discussion. I really appreciate y'all taking time to be here and great questions from the audience as well. So thank you guys. Looking forward to having you on future panels. Up next, we have our second panel discussion of the day. This time we are talking about security and compliance and looking at the effects of multi-cloud in the federal government. So I would now like our second round of panelists to please come on screen, and you can go ahead and unmute yourselves if you like. And let's kick it off this time as well by getting you to introduce yourself by your name, your agency, your role, and anything that you would like to share up top with our audience that you think that we should know about. Maybe we can start with Steve, please.
Morning, folks. Stephen Hernandez here. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Department of Education. Also the co-chair of the Federal CISO Council and the government chair of the ACT-IX Cybersecurity of Interest. The Department of Education, we're 100% cloud, so this is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. And when we talk about a multi-cloud environment, we're living it. We've been living it over pretty much the past decade. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about some of our lessons learned and also some of our forecasts and projections for what we see on the road ahead. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. And over to you, Mike.
So good morning, everyone. Mike Wilkerson. I run the VMware Cloud on AWS business for VMware on the cloud specialist team. So happy to be here this morning. Look forward to an interactive and invigorating conversation, because this is a topic that's front and center, I think, in everyone's mind when it comes to cloud.
Fantastic. And over to you, Devarius.
Yes, good morning. Devarius Peoples, the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Thanks, Devarius. All right, so let's start off in the prep call. I learned a little bit more about Steve's agency, and given that you guys are already 100% in the cloud, what are some of the challenges that you are seeing in the security space currently?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first, I think I want to talk about just how wonderful the cloud is from a security perspective. And I signed on and got to hear some of the last conversation, and those discussions around having tools and capabilities and the native capabilities built with robust security in mind. That is very much what we've observed. Our cloud service providers can give us capabilities and services out of the gate, very reasonable price, and truly service oriented. Turn them on, start consuming them. And from that perspective, the cloud has been outstanding. Where we still have opportunity as we go forward is really around this idea of understanding, do we have the right number of clouds? We have just south of 50 major cloud service providers in the department. And part of us, when we look at optimization of that portfolio and rationalization of that portfolio, it's do we have duplicative cloud workloads? Do we have workloads that would be better suited in one environment than another? And a huge part of that conversation also focuses around security. There is not necessarily direct parity in terms of visibility, for example, for what folks may have on-prem or even virtualized in a similar architecture as on-prem. We use continuous diagnostics and mitigation, right? Getting information and visibility about specific virtual machines and workloads and what's happening in a security perspective. Well, if I'm in a software as a service environment, I'm not getting that same type of visibility. I'm getting a different level of visibility, mostly up around layer 6, layer 7 of the OSI model. And so for us, a big opportunity as we go forward is figuring out, how do we start to collect all the information and bring that information into some semblance of parity, so that when I'm looking at risk, I'm making apples to apples comparisons. And I think that's a big opportunity for all of us going ahead.
Great. Devarius, where are you and your agency and your cloud journey, and what are some of your security implications that you're addressing?
Yeah, so within the Corps of Engineers, I would say we're 100% cloud. The reason why I say that is because we're operating a hybrid cloud environment, right? So when you look at it and you virtualize it and then you encompass that with one environment, I'd say we're operating on that same standard cloud environment. But within the Corps of Engineers, we do have 2 physical data centers that reside in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and then the other is in Portland, Oregon. And we're in the process of modernizing those 2 data centers and moving them to more geographically enabling them to be more optimized for our use within the Corps. So we're moving to an Equinix concept to Ashburn, Virginia, and then San Jose, California. And that gives us an active concept, and we're looking at expanding that to a triple active architecture with the last data center being down in Texas. So we are utilizing the major pristine data centers of Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. So we began to deploy that hybrid concept, and it's been working for us. Some of the concepts we've been looking at, one being that of zero trust, specifically centered around IT and OT. Due to the fact that operational technology aspects is something that we can't necessarily forget about. And we've applied some of the executive order principles already currently to our operational environment. So cybersecurity is something we put at the forefront, and we've been working with a lot of our mission partners to ensure that we properly secure those environments.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that in a bit, but I want to turn it over to Mike first from the industry perspective. How do you go about advising your customers when it comes to their security concerns or challenges in multi-cloud?
And that's a great question. I think the first thing we have to do, we do is, just because you're operating in a cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service, as an example, the concerns and issues that you have in a traditional on-premise environment doesn't go away. It merely just translates over to now you're dealing with the cloud service provider. So that kind of demystify that. What we really work with our customers on from a best practices and an education perspective is, now that the one fundamental difference of being in a cloud model is you're now in a shared responsibility model. Things that you traditionally had full access and control over, things like root access, things like you had, somebody had all the keys to the kingdom. In a traditional, on-premise operating model, you now have to work with your CSP in a shared model. Where's the line of demarcation? What do they have control over versus what do you have control over? And it really becomes complicated in things like fault tolerance and things like, incident responses, things like logging events. What does the cloud provider, what are they responsible for versus what you're responsible for? And how do you weave those shared responsibilities into your current operating model as you move forward?
Great, thank you. So Stephen, how are you guys participating in FedRAMP and OSCAL and maintaining compliance that way?
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned OSCAL because that's definitely something that's front and center with us.
Oh, and I want to say too, could you explain what OSCAL is for those who are unaware?
Absolutely. So that's the open source control assessment language. I didn't know I was going to be quizzed today on acronyms, but that's a project out of NIST, which eventually takes everybody's favorite exercise, which is the physical documentation around security controls. So the system security plan, the contingency plan, et cetera, all the NIST 853 family, the 700 some odd controls for most systems, and it puts them in machine readable format. It's an extensible language format so that in the future, we can have service providers like our CSPs providing that information in an OSCAL compliant format that can then be read by our governance, risk, and compliance tools. And that's a wonderful panacea because at that point, we will have effectively digitized the information in the system security plan. So it's a potentially enormous win, especially in the cloud space, because at the end of the day, every CSP that I know of has all their security control information in a database somewhere. And then when it's time to give it to the agency or the FedRAMP program, print it to PDF and send it over, and then we'll get the humans involved, and things get slow and things get error prone in a big hurry because that's the nature of that type of work. So for us, as we're looking forward about how are we optimizing and what are we looking to take advantage of, OSCAL is one of those things where we're very much on the front of figuring out how can we start, one, making this a standard requirement across our cloud service providers, and two, our governance, risk, and compliance tool providers. We get those two folks on board and talking, we all of a sudden have, for example, control changes at the speed that they're happening. As soon as it's updated here, we know about it here. We can also provide more security around that information. If the cloud service provider wants to watermark or personalize information before they send it over, they can do that. If something happens, they can trace it back, know where the potential challenge is. With that as well, we're heavy participants in the FedRAMP Liaison program. So we have our defined FedRAMP Liaison. This program has been wonderful because it's really getting the agency's voice into the program. Ashley and her team have done a great job of instilling this sense of inclusion, and they're listening and evolving rapidly to our suggestions. So the future is very bright for FedRAMP. We're very excited for what they have on the horizon. And things like OSCAL are actions and priorities for them. And so when it all comes together, I think it's going to be a whole new world in terms of thinking about compliance for an information system.
Okay. Great, thank you. I got to shout out Dr. Michaela Iorga at NIST for OSCAL. And I'm curious to hear, DeVarius, are you guys looking at these OSCAL FedRAMP requirements as well? And have you ran into challenges with them from your agency perspective?
Yeah, so we've looked at, I'm going to say everything FedRAMP provides. However, being that the Army Corps of Engineers is a dual reporting organization where we report federally, working with OMB. We also are a DoD Army reporting agency as well. So from an Army perspective, there are also different federal reporting laws that the Army requires. So when you talk about things such as your cybersecurity service provider or your CSSP, we, per Army regulation, work with a cybersecurity service provider named C5ISR. And when you look at C5ISR, they provide us all of the cybersecurity services from beginning to end. So when it comes to the security of the cloud and those type of things specifically, we're not necessarily the prime person that manages and maintains those capabilities on the back end from a cybersecurity service provider standpoint. Now, however, when you think about the civil mission, for those civil related systems, we are responsible for managing and maintaining those. So that's where our collaboration comes in at with the DHS and the CISA community, taking advantage of all FedRAMP services and capabilities that it provides. So we are looking at some of those. We necessarily haven't looked at that specific capability or resource as it pertains to FedRAMP, but going through the process and working with C5ISR, we have taken advantage of so many other tools out there that will allow you some of the same functionality to ensure that your environment is properly secured.
Awesome, thank you. So Mike, with all that being said, what are the inherent risks associated with security federal requirements and being cloud first?
Another great question. There's a couple of different risks beyond just security, but they're kind of all sort of intertwined. The first has to do with sort of the operational impact. As I said before, just the fact that you're in a cloud versus a traditional, native on-premise infrastructure, from a high level, you still have the same level of risk and potential attacks that you'd have versus on-premise. It's the operational model that you have to really think through. Talked about it before, kind of the mechanics of troubleshooting. Again, now that you're in a shared model, who does what, and you have to be close collaboration with your CSP or your MSP as to where the handoffs are. Things like fault resolution, things like vendor lock-in that make it difficult. Once I think, an old VMware CEO once referred to cloud as sort of the Hotel California concept. You can check in, but you can't check out, right? Making sure that you don't get in a situation where you can't do that if you need to, change cloud providers. And I think just the nature of cloud itself being, sort of agile, self-service, on-demand services from an IT perspective, has just encouraged this notion of what we've seen grow at Shadow IT. Even as central IT organizations move to offer cloud-based services to their constituents, there are those organizations that go, why do I need to wait to go through a procurement cycle when I can just, have my credit card and swipe and get a couple instances spun up and do my own thing? There's now another threat vector that IT could be unaware of, that they have to potentially now have to go out and secure, because it's now another point of entry into their infrastructure. And I think kind of wrapping all this together, we talk about FedRAMP. To me, FedRAMP is the baseline. It's sort of like table stakes to be able to participate and operate sort of a shared services type cloud. But going beyond that is looking at different things like, we've always been concerned about north-south threat detection. I think now FedRAMP has kind of stepped up some of their requirements through NIST and is now, looking at sort of east-west in-boundary threat detection. Those are all things that really need to be considered when you're looking at a cloud-first model, because, again, to kind of summarize that, it's not unique to how things currently traditionally been operated. It's just, you really have to coordinate and understand where those handoffs are.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and throw up our first poll question of the day, which is, how confident are you in the expertise and ability of vendors to secure and manage the ongoing security of your cloud solutions? You can answer very confident, moderately so, slightly, or not confident at all. So go ahead and answer that to ensure that you receive your CPE credits today. I'm curious to hear from our panelists on that. Stephen, what is your relationship like when working with the vendor? How do you guys, communicate and express concerns and have trust with one another?
I'll say this is an interesting question because it varies. Some cloud providers are very aggressive when it comes to cybersecurity and risk management. They frankly they'll reach out to us for preliminary input on some of their thoughts and ideas on how they're evolving their security paradigm and what it can mean for us. Then we have the other end of the spectrum. Some folks are saying, hey, y'all put out a contract, it said X, Y, and Z, we are meeting X, Y, and Z. And yes, it was 5 years ago, but if you want changes, we can talk mods or equitable adjustments. And so it's a fascinating conversation because as we work through it, we understand both ends of the spectrum. Some people view security and assurance as a strategic driver for their product portfolio. It's an enabler, it's a differentiator. Other folks still view it as a cost center. And it's just, it's something we have to do because we were asked to do it. I think that in our conversations, kind of the center of all of this, especially with our cloud service providers, is what we call our ConMon meetings, or our continuous monitoring meetings. And these are meetings that come out of the FedRAMP program. Monthly, we get together with our CSPs and we talk about, what's happening in the security space. What we're getting out of it, especially from a market perspective, is these folks that are on the leading edge of security, they're still very hungry for more business, and they're showing that they're willing to grow and adapt and change, especially as the government's requirements change. And as we're recompeting older requirements, these folks are getting more of the business, which is great for us from a security perspective. But frankly, they're not winning on security alone. They're also winning on functionality and requirements, meeting what the government needs. So I see more of that occurring in the future. And I find those cloud service providers that are more rigorously engaging in, for example, those ConMon meetings and having open discussions about their security and where they're going, they're doing better in the competitive process.
Great. And it looks like folks at home replied they're mostly confident with their relationships. So that's fantastic. Devarius, I want to pose the same question to you. What is that like at your agency?
Yeah, so I believe cyber security is a shared responsibility. And that's a shared responsibility between the government and the vendor. Because ultimately, many people have many definitions of cyber, and many people also have many definitions of cloud. So with that being said, from a federal side of the house, if I don't, or if I can't lay out my expectations to a service provider to be able to provide me an acceptable level of service, or at least identify what I believe is to be an acceptable level of service, then I get what it is that they provide. And on the same side of the spectrum, if I'm just gonna rely on that vendor to provide me that level of service, I really can't question the level of service that they're giving me if I can't articulate to them what I expect. So from a cybersecurity side of the house, one of the things that we continue to do, yes, we look at the continuous monitoring things, we look at the risk management framework of things, but how do we as a government, and this is what we look at from the Corps of Engineers, how do we as a government determine our own fate? How do I help pull the vendor along and say, hey, I need these things, and then be a demanding customer of what it is I need? Because until we can help them out, they'll never really be able to help us out. It's all about the requirement and where do we see the end state. But that's a two-way street, and that's how we begin to look at it, because operationally, I'm putting my fate in your hands. However, I'm still not going to let you just determine that fate without me providing input. And we look at it from the perspective of construction inside the Corps of Engineers. You're not just going to give a construction company a blueprint and just say, hey, build my house, right? At the end of the day, what you're going to say is, well, I like this room to sit this way. The sunlight needs to reflect that way. Or, I wanted to sit cat corner so it'll look like this when you come across the cul-de-sac. And that's the way we do in construction. So we look at cybersecurity the exact same way. It's a two-way street. And that's the dialogue and interaction that we have with most of our vendors.
Oh yeah, no, that's awesome. So Mike, same question, but flipped, you're on the vendor side. What are you guys doing to build that trust, communication, those relationships with the government? And this would be a good opportunity to ask as well. How are you working with government on best practices?
So again, from our perspective, we look at some of the security requirements as sort of, baseline table stakes, right? Making sure that we're working with GSA and the FedRAMP program office to put all of our products through that certification, taking it to the folks at DISA, engaging with the DISA team to make sure that, okay, we've got FedRAMP on one side, we also have to meet the different impact levels on the DISA side, be it, 2, 4, 5, and even potentially 6 and higher. And making sure that we're doing things and we're keeping up to speed with those bodies, and even with NIST, so that, you know, as we continue to develop and add capabilities to the cloud, because, you know, that's the other sort of benefit slash a potential issue with cloud is, unlike traditional perpetual software, you know, you had longer release cycles, you know, and, you know, customers could prepare for, okay, this change is coming, these changes are coming, these features are being added. Let's make sure they're put into the development life cycle. With cloud, you have vendors adding features almost sometimes daily, weekly, on a monthly basis that, you know, require that same level of, you know, what's a major revision? What's a major code change? What's a major update? Does it have to go through, you know, does this violate our ATO? Do we have to then go back and recertify it, re-audit it, that sort of stuff? So we make sure that we work with those standards bodies to fully understand, you know, what's going to be the impact of changes that we're making, you know, in the platform before it gets released to that customer. And it's not going to do anything to jeopardize, you know, existing ATOs or, you know, existing cybersecurity postures. Additionally, is we have we also have, and the other CSPs do too as well, that we work with, sort of that constant monitoring of looking for threats, looking for suspicious behavior. And it's incumbent upon us in the cloud provider space that if we detect a threat in our own system, that we proactively notify, you know, our customers that, you know, we've identified this threat. Here's a remediation. It's been handled. We're handling it, so that that communication is proactive versus, you know, having it bubble up from a customer's perspective, going, hey, we noticed this in our system. You know, tell us what's going on. So I can't stress it enough. Sort of adhering to the standards bodies as a baseline table stakes, and having that constant line of communication with the customers that, you know, on changes, on things that we're seeing, things that they're seeing, et cetera.
Right, thank you. So I believe it was Devarius who mentioned data centers and working with Equinix in Ashburn. On that same note, to Stephen, my question to you is, how are you guys handling data, and, you know, what's the relationship? Why is it so important for security and compliance in a multi-cloud environment?
Yeah, and so the security and compliance piece, obviously FedRAMP is the heavy lifter there, and it's really about visibility. And this is one of those areas where we see a lot of variance in our cloud service providers. One of the sticky wickets we have is when we look at a package through FedRAMP, contractually, we're held to saying, and by agreement with GSA, frankly, we're held to saying that when we're done with the information, we're going to delete it and get rid of it. The challenge we have is that, for example, for our risk scorecards and our dashboards and everything, they're near real time. For most of our department risk scorecards, we look at things daily, we update daily. And so if we're only able to hold the data for that moment, that's a challenge. We have some cloud service providers, again, the more progressive ones, that are saying, we'll give you the information. Let's put the right NDAs in place. Let's put the right contractual language in place to protect ourselves. And we'll give you the data you need to have an accurate picture of a compliance risk and what we have in our plan of actions and milestones, et cetera. And then, of course, we have the other end of the spectrum, which is, sorry, y'all, you get what FedRAMP gives you, and that's all we're going to do. And for us, as we go forward, we're going to be moving towards what I discussed earlier, where contractually we're going to require, yes, you're going to participate in the FedRAMP program and meet those requirements, but two, there's certain risk information that we're going to want in near real time in our data lake, and here's how we expect to receive it. And I think that that's going to be a big driver, especially in multi-cloud, and ensuring that whether it's in one cloud or another, we're getting parity. We're getting a similar view, especially from a risk scoring perspective.
Thank you. Mike, do you guys often get questions from your customers about data and data lakes and data mining and things like that?
Mainly it's about, you know, most questions we get are about, you know, tool compatibility. You know, can they, you know, will the tools that they're using today, can that still be deployed? Does the cloud alter, you know, anything of that nature?
Okay, great. So Devarius, circling back to what you mentioned in your intro, I want to talk a little bit more about the executive order on security. What are you guys working on right now to address those concerns and those priorities?
So a lot of our priorities, we are looking at a lot of modernization priorities. And with that being said, from a financial perspective, we're beginning to identify how to properly resource some of those things. We're looking at cybersecurity from a modernization perspective with regards to some of the tools that are needed to be able to ensure we're properly securing things, meaning also divesting of capabilities where we can modernize and reinvest to move things along as well. So we are definitely moving forward in our cloud journey, modernization journey, but we did have to assess some of our infrastructure, whether that how we looked at cloud or whether that was how we looked at on-prem capabilities, and identify what was the best way forward from a core of engineer side of the house. So we've taken a lot of those things into consideration, but definitely the financial piece, the cybersecurity piece, and the infrastructure piece were all critical in our journey to cloud and cybersecurity.
And then what about over at the Department of Education? Are you guys looking at TMF? How are you handling funding?
Yeah, we're looking at it in both avenues, both our traditional investment forecasting and execution, but also we've definitely put some proposals forward in the Technology Modernization Fund. And I think that we're going to see just a tremendous amount of activity. I know that the administration did some great work with the folks on the Hill to say, you know, we've got some great cybersecurity actions that need to be taken. They also looked at the different repayment models, and they added some additional repayment models that don't just look at necessarily the monetary returns, but also, for example, are we kind of buying down risk in a situation? And so between all of that, we've seen a tremendous response from the agency side towards the Technology Modernization Fund. And I know that for the most part, GSA and OMB, they're working through a lot of these submissions now. We're hopeful that ours will make it through. But what I'm most excited for is that no matter who makes it through, it's going to be an incredible move forward for the federal government writ large, because every single one of those projects is going to be about modernization and or security, either directly security or security as part of modernization. So I think it's going to be a quantum leap forward in the next couple of years when that investment hits the agencies and we're able to start executing. And we're really excited about it.
Excellent. Awesome. All right, let's throw up poll number 2, please. How likely are you to consider entrusting cloud operations and security from a multi-cloud as a service provider? Multi-cloud as a service provider. Okay. How do we say that acronym in CAS? Answer, very familiar, pretty familiar. I don't know what it is at a very basic level, or I know what it is at a basic level, or I've never heard of it before. So for those people who are going to answer, I've never heard of it before, Mike, maybe you could kind of explain at a high level what that is, because I don't even know what that is either.
So yeah, just at a high level, multi-cloud as a service provider, you know, I think it's kind of you're traditionally termed as a cloud broker, meaning you have one aggregating body that, you know, has a catalog of different CSPs to offer solutions from, whether it be, you know, infrastructure as a service, PaaS or SaaS, and they can kind of, you know, they're providing a fully managed service across a litany of cloud service providers that they offer back to their constituents.
Okay, awesome. So then what would you say to folks who answer that, you know, they're not likely to consider entrusting cloud operations and security from that provider?
Kind of want to take a deeper dive into some of the requirements that potentially maybe why not, because what I think you're also going to see is, you know, traditionally, you know, everyone thinks of cloud services as, you know, my compute, networking, storage, and data, and all is running in a data center that's, you know, physically miles away somewhere else, and I have no control over it. We're starting to see, you know, several cloud providers, you know, offering that same type of managed cloud experience, but because of things like data sovereignty, things like security and controls, things like access or proximity to data, there's latency issues. They're offering a fully managed cloud, but they're offering it in a way that is running in a user's facility. So I kind of equate this to like it's basically, you know, network, compute, and storage, the same managed service that you would be consuming, say, from a number of providers, but instead of it physically being located, in their data center, it's physically located in yours. You're providing, the power, the cooling, and the rack space. They control everything, and I kind of equate it to like your cable box or your satellite service. They ship you a box, you plug it in, turn it on, and in the cloud case, they plug it in and turn it on, and then you don't touch it. You just, press your button and use whatever services you need. And if it breaks or there's an issue, they manage it. So I would kind of advise users that aren't comfortable with that to sort of look at other sort of non-traditional cloud models or cloud offerings, and to see if there's, if you can take advantage of the managed service, but also meet some of your, security and data sovereignty requirements by having it be on-prem, just managed by someone else.
Great. Well, thank you for explaining that to folks like myself who had no idea. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in before we move on?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent observation and an excellent point. And for folks who do have those type of, it's got to be on X soil or specifically in this physical location. A lot of our major CSPs offer ways to deploy that capability on-prem, and so to the point, they will ship you a pallet of stuff. You put it in your data center, power it, turn it on, make sure it has internet connectivity. And basically, you can bifurcate your workloads and say, any of this workload has to be on this particular section of hardware and storage and processing, and it's there. But all the capabilities, all the services your cloud provider offers, et cetera, they're all there. So folks have gotten very creative in how you can still leverage all the capability of the cloud and then still meet some of those data sovereignty requirements.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is you also have to keep in mind, with every capability or new thought you go to, there's a cost, right? And for those who are cash, this may not be the best option for you because it's an expensive upfront investment. Granted, you may see I'm gonna say an avoidance on the back end, but you have to have funds to invest. And if this is really something that you're invested in and it's important to you, then do that. It does have benefits on the back end from a cost inside of the house, but if you don't have funds to invest up front, then you may want to take a different strategic approach as to how you acquire services from a cloud perspective.
Talking on mute, my bad. Speaking of funding, let's go ahead and put up our third and final poll question. What are the main barriers of migrating to cloud-based security solutions? And the options include internal staff qualifications, budget, data resiliency and workload, understanding security and compliance, establishing and managing government policies, lack of integration with on-prem, evaluating and trusting qualified vendors, and then the final option, managing multiple cloud solution requirements. So please go ahead and answer that one. Which ones stick out to you guys the most as panelists that you would say, oh, that's definitely, our top barrier? Stephen, could you weigh in first, please?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really around that culture and that workforce and making sure that we're in a situation where first and foremost, folks understand what we can ask for, just how great those capabilities are and what's changing. And we're talking about zero trust architectures now and how that's going to shift several paradigms of how we do business throughout the entire IT sector. So making sure that our government folks, especially the folks that are going to be doing the contracting, our COs and our cores and our contract specialists and our program folks, that they have an awareness. They have an awareness of what they can ask for so that we're asking the vendors the right questions when we go out and solicit. The second part is working around the idea of really making sure that as we go forward, we are leveraging a lot of these new technologies and capabilities. The OSCAL piece, making sure that folks are only accepting FedRAMP environments. And then also looking for those opportunities to make sure we're buying from vendors that are going to fit into our future architectures. For example, if a vendor here wants to be competitive, they better make sure their security data can be ingested into my data lake. That's almost a deal breaker in most cases for me. if I have a vendor that's not going to be able to do that. So I think that between the culture and then making sure that when we're clear about our requirements, the vendor can also meet those requirements. When those are going to come together, I think we're going to be able to slice through a lot of the challenges and take those opportunities.
Thank you. Devarius, what would you have answered as the main barrier for migrating to cloud-based security?
I would just say really understanding the requirements, right? Because everything doesn't necessarily need to go to a quote cloud. Granted, the hybrid concept works well, but you have to really perform that alternative of analysis, do a solid business case assessment. Hence, you see or you hear the term cloud smart versus cloud ready. I think that concept is a critical concept because again, everything just doesn't go to the cloud. Again, we're a construction organization and we like to use the house concept. When you move, sometimes you just don't take old furniture with you, right? Some of that old furniture just easily need to go to a dump pile or it just needs to stay where it's at. And that's the same for cloud. You really have to take the opportunity to identify what your resources are, what your resource workloads are, and what is your true end state. Because I think we so quickly say, well, it needs to go to a cloud because cloud is the buzzword. However, it may be more expensive to go to a cloud than it would be to operate an on-prem capability. So really defining what your requirements are to make that cloud smart decision and not just a cloud ready type of decision is very important. And those are some of the things that we're doing even from the Corps of Engineers, performing that analysis to ensure we make the right decision.
I want to springboard on that because that's a very important point. And there's this discussion of what's called workload repatriation, which I love the words our industry comes up with, but it's basically that. It's saying, this particular workload, we should move it in. And there's some great use cases out there. I can't remember if it was Dropbox or Box. One of the two had a use case where they did that. And in their SEC filing, they're like, we saved $27 million doing that, bringing this workload on-prem. And I think what I've seen in the lessons learned there, much to Devarius's point, is they had a very clearly defined workload, very specific. They knew exactly what they needed, lots of fast storage, lots of connectivity, and we were very clear around the functionality that we needed. And it made sense for us to say, yeah, we should go buy the hardware in the facility, because when you look at the fixed cost over time versus the variable in the cloud, it absolutely was the right decision. So I love that comment. And if you want to find some fun reading, look up cloud repatriation. It's a vibrant debate.
Mike, what is some industry advice you can offer up to help, shape these concerns?
So I think, just beyond just security, I think security should be a factor in any sort of cloud migration, and not the factor. I think it should be a factor. But both Stephen and Devarius made great points. We have what we hear from customers, just from moving to cloud in general, is a perceived skill set gap. In that, I've got an entire staff of people who are used to doing things and managing things with one set of tools on premise. Do I now have to retrain them to do all that in the cloud, including security tools and monitoring? So I think, what we see customers do is just do a full app rationalization exercise to see, okay, I've got this catalog of applications, what needs to go to the cloud, what needs to stay on-prem. Hybrid is going to be here. I don't think hybrid's ever going to go away, for a whole litany of reasons that we could have a different discussion on. But really go through and understand those requirements and see what needs to go into the cloud, what can go in the cloud, what needs to stay on-prem. How do I stitch two together, and how do I have the most complete picture where the delta between how I manage my on-prem environment and my cloud environment is greatly reduced, so that I don't have to, have multiple tool sets, learn all different tools to be able to manage both. And I think there's capabilities out there and technologies that allow you to do that. And security is one of those factors that you have to weigh into it, but I don't think it's the de facto factor.
So I feel like we need to talk about the people side of things too. How has multi-cloud affected this life-work balance and the lack of the human element now that we've been in this, remote work, or I guess more like hybrid now environment for the past year and a half? What are some thoughts around that? Devarius, could you weigh in on that first, please?
Yeah, so I think the remote construct is here to stay. It's just now finding that balance between mission requirements, what will require you to go into maybe an office setting, or what will require you to really work from home. We talk about it in context of cybersecurity, and we talk about it in context of cloud. I do believe that the cloud is an enabler, which enables us to be able to deploy these type of services and meet the end user where they are, versus having to force them to meet us where we're at. And I think that's a benefit of the cloud, and we've seen those benefits through many capabilities, Microsoft Teams right now to rapidly deploy it as we handle things, even through Zoom and so many other collaboration tools, we're being able to meet the end user in a cyber secure manner, protecting the endpoints as well as the data that you need access to. So I think this remote construct will be here to stay. It's just a matter of being able to properly secure the environment as users operate.
Thank you. And then what about you, Stephen? What are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's definitely, we're never going back to the way things were, that's for sure. And I think that initially, when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of challenges with the multi-cloud environment, simply because, especially for data-heavy workloads, a lot of that traffic was being hairpinned in through what we call TIC2O compliant connections. Basically, everything needed to come, all VPN traffic comes into the agency and then goes back out through the cloud. And obviously, for some departments and agencies, that was an incredible toll. What that led to, though, was a lot of great discussions. First and foremost, shout out to CISA, Sean Connolly, and the Trusted Internet team there. They quickly came out with TIC 3.0, the use cases there, and also a lot of guidance around COVID. They started to do things like, in certain instances, we should split tunnel. In certain instances, we should be looking at direct cloud access through a cloud access security broker, and really changing the way that folks are able to access those cloud resources. And in doing so, really lessen the burden and the crunch and the pressure off a lot of the departments and agencies. Simple things like bifurcating Teams traffic, video and audio outside the VPN saved some departments and agencies in terms of their bandwidth and their ability to do work. So going forward, I think, especially as we look at the zero trust architectures and we look at a TIC construct where the cloud becomes the edge or the cloud becomes the trusted internet broker, we're going to see a lot more movement in that direction. And I think that ultimately what it's going to make is a better user experience for the end user. But two, it's also going to allow our organizations to truly maintain the work anywhere type of situation we're in right now.
Great, thank you. And then Mike, same question over to you.
Yeah, all excellent points. And I have a couple of real world examples on kind of what the pandemic did to sort of change how things are being done. And I won't mention the agency's name, but this was actually the last customer I got to meet with face to face. It was March 16th of 2020 in their office before DC went into the quarantine. But this particular user, they had deployed VDI as a technology, but they were running their VDI farm in their data center. Well, now that they had to basically send home a couple thousand people, they couldn't, number one, get equipment in fast enough to be able to rack and stack and deploy it. And number two, even if they could, they weren't sure they could get people in the building to be able to do it. So they quickly turned to us, on the cloud side and said, can we run VDI in the cloud? And how quickly can we do it? And we were able to pivot and work with this customer. And within 2 to 3, it was within 2 weeks, they went from 100 users running VDI through the cloud to over 1,000. And then within 3 weeks, they were serving almost 2,000 users in the cloud. And that was almost like, that was with zero presence in the cloud to, spinning up to support 2,000 users in about a 3-week time frame, which I think showed a lot of people that, we can pivot and do things quickly when we have to. We don't have to go through all these, yes, you have all these testing cycles and review boards that you have to go through to get projects done. But I think what this has shown is sometimes you can pivot and respond quickly by using, modern technology and using things like the cloud to be able to do that. So to Stephen's and to various points, I think the toothpaste is out of the tube now when it comes to how we're working. And I don't think we're going to be able to go back. And I think that, people, I think the one thing it's enabled is, we always talk in industry about one of the drivers is bringing sort of that consumer experience that we all have on our daily basis with our phones and tablets. If everything that we do is in the cloud and we can get to our apps and get to our data from wherever we're at. I think we've quickly sort of pulled back the curtain and exposed that to government now, that you can do that and you can serve your users and give them that consumer-like experience a lot faster than we once thought possible.
Excellent, thank you. So we are running up against time, but I want to give you each the opportunity to share any of your final thoughts, key takeaways, lasting impressions, whatever you want to leave our audience with. Stephen, let's start with you, please.
I'd say, you know, I said something the other day and someone's like, oh, you should stamp that. So what I said was, it was in response to a question about, you know, how do we get through fear, uncertainty, and doubt? And my initial gut reaction was solid architecture. And if folks are looking at multi-cloud environments, either you have one or you think you're headlong going to find yourself in that environment, solid architectures, especially solid security architectures, is how you can start to have that common dialogue amongst your cloud security providers about what's important to you. In my organization, that is ultimately distilled down into our cybersecurity scorecard. And when we talk to our cloud service providers, we talk about our scorecard and where our risk appetite is and where our risk thresholds are. And for us, you know, if they're below a 2, that's a very serious conversation. That's below appetite. If they're above 2, moving towards a 3, that's great. And our cloud service providers are catching on. They understand how we're doing business. And when we start to tie it back, and here's why that's so important. We have several trillions of dollars that flow through this department every year. We have a third of the nation's PII. Things start to click and they're like, oh, this is why you're so upset that some of the encryption isn't quite where it needs to be. Yes, exactly. So I would say lean in on that. If you don't have a great architecture, now is the time to start, because we have the Zero Trust architecture in this special publication, 800-207. Use it. Get something on the books and start leveraging that as a conversation focal piece for your conversations with your CSPs going forward.
Love it. Thank you, Stephen. And over to you, Devarius.
Yeah, several things. I think key takeaways. You know, the cloud has many benefits. It will definitely allow organizations to modernize in a more expedient manner, as well as take receive full benefit of shared workloads, as well as help with modernization efforts. Able to properly secure it is definitely critical, but I think the main thing is ensuring that your workforce is trained to be able to effectively use it. Because ultimately, if the workforce isn't trained, then regardless of what technical capability you decide to go with, it is meaningless. So I think investing resources in the professional growth and development for your employees is definitely critical in order to be a successful organization. And I think if you do that, then modernization is faster, and it also helps reduce your burden of cost as well, versus having to rely on others to do that for you. So
Fantastic. Thank you, Devarius. And Mike.
So I just want to say ditto. No. So yeah, just kind of a key some takeaways is, as I said earlier, just because you're in the cloud, you still have, you know, the cloud still brings with it the same risks and potential issues that you currently have on-prem. You know, that doesn't go away. So there's nothing new that's going to come at you. It's just how you respond and how you communicate and interact with your CSP or your MSP is what's the key point there. And then lastly, you know, this notion of hybrid cloud is not going to go away, but even in the public cloud space, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. There's different choices out there now. There's different ways of bringing the cloud, you know, from, you know, provider's data center back to your data center with that same experience. So do some, you know, we'll work with you on some of the research, some of the homework, and really, you know, do, you know, like anything else, you know, the more rationalization you can do up front, the more planning you can do, the more successful and smoother things will go. And lastly, that's one of the great things about cloud. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be, you can change and pivot, you know, a lot more agile and dynamic than you could in the past versus on-prem, but doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a good way to start. So
Great, I love it. These are wonderful, lasting impressions to make on our audience. So thank you guys so much for your time and being here. We'll be really excited to have you all back on a panel discussion later in the year. And I want to thank again our partners at Rackspace Technology, AWS, VMware, and Carousel for partnering with us. And I want to thank you all at home for joining us today. And we hope to see you on Thursday for our upcoming webinar on intelligent data management, next steps in the digital transformation journey. You don't want to miss this one. So looking forward to seeing you there. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday.